The outbreak of World War I saw America sitting on the sidelines as far as President Wilson was concerned. America had no interest whatsoever intervening in a European conflict. Besides, Europe was over 3,000 miles away. This was a European problem. However, that did not mean the U.S. business interests would not get involved. There were immense profits to be made in banking and manufacturing in this European conflict, and America was ready to do business with all comers. American manufacturing began supplying war materials to any country that could pay for it and come and get it. In reality, that meant the Triple Entente. Those were the allies in World War I. American banks were more than happy to loan money to the belligerent nations, as long as they were part of the Triple Entente, though. Now, as far as President Wilson was concerned, America would stay neutral in this great war. Now, he stated, the United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls. We must be impartial in thought as well as in action. My thought is of America, a nation that neither sits in judgment upon others nor is disturbed in her own counsel, and which keeps herself fit and free to do what is honest and disinterested and truly serviceable for the peace of the world. Now, Wilson's understanding of foreign affairs was wanting, to say the least. He was a one-term governor from the state of New Jersey. Before that, he was the president of Princeton University. He was an academic with a PhD who understood foreign policy, though through the lens of academia. Wilson's foreign policy was based on moral diplomacy. Wilson believed in a system in which support was given only to countries whose beliefs are analogous to the United States. He rejected Metternich's philosophy of realpolitik. Now, this was evident in his handling of Latin American affairs. Now, in 1914, Wilson occupied the port of Vera Cruz, Mexico, with U.S. Marines for over 6 months due to 3 insignificant events perpetrated by the government of General Victoriano Huerta. Over a 3-day period, April 9th to the 11th, the studied contempt, President Wilson's words, not mine, of Huerta's government demanded that American honor be avenged. Now, the first incident was when U.S. sailors and their commanding officer were arrested in Tampico, Mexico, while they were looking for gasoline for the ship's generator. The next event was the detention of a U.S. diplomatic mail courier at Vera Cruz, Mexico. The final incident was the delay of sending an official dispatch of the State Department. These 3 events infuriated Wilson. Wilson called it studied contempt. In reality, it was an excuse for Wilson to force a regime change in Mexico. Now, Wilson backed up Admiral Mayo's demand that Huerta's government salute the American flag. Wilson knew Huerta would not comply. That was all Wilson needed to occupy the city of Vera Cruz. Mexico is still upset over that little incursion made by the U.S. Now, a year later, Wilson recognizes the Carranza government in October of 1915. This infuriated Mexican revolutionary Poncho Villa. Well, what does Villa do? Villa retaliates by making cross-border raids into the U.S., culminating in the Columbus, New Mexico raid of March 9, 1916. Now, in that raid, 19 U.S. personnel were executed, 38 soldiers killed, 3 were wounded, 22 civilians killed, 18 soldiers captured and shot in Mexico, 3 missing and 8 taken prisoner. This in turn led to the botched punitive expedition against Villa. Now, this invasion into Mexico lasted almost 11 months. We never caught Villa, and to this day in Mexico, Villa is considered a national hero. Wilson's moral diplomacy was a disaster. Now, Wilson's handling of foreign affairs in Latin America can best be exemplified with his statement about the Latin American dictators. Wilson said, "I am going to teach the South American republics to elect good men." He said this in November 1913. Wilson acted as if he was the schoolmaster and the Latin American people were the unruly students. Wilson's foreign policy can best be summed up as naive ideology at best or utterly inept at worst. Now the problem was Wilson preferred to be his own Secretary of State when dealing with foreign affairs. Wilson's handling of the European War and the belligerents operating on neutral American soil was just as disastrous as his Latin American policy. A CIA paper written in March 2024 had a sidebar piece explaining the United States' position on foreign espionage. Quote, "At the beginning of World War I, German, British, French, Russian, and Austrian buying agents, spies, and saboteurs entered the United States and roamed the country largely untouched. Now, during the Neutrality period, 1914-1917, the legal framework for limiting and controlling foreign intelligence operatives in the United States was woefully inadequate. Agents of foreign governments did not have to register, nor were activities such as spying on U.S. industry, sabotaging agents of enemy countries, and engaging in propaganda illegal. U.S. law enforcement agents could not shadow foreign agents and investigate their activities, but could intervene in cases of violation of U.S. neutrality law, making it illegal basically for Americans to wage war against any country at peace with the U.S. or other criminal statutes." You see, Wilson was a reformer president. He did not believe in the use of realpolitik, and he didn't really believe that he was being manipulated by the European powers. Wilson did not see the necessity of pushing through Congress laws that would protect the United States from foreign intrigue at the start of the Great War in 1914. Now, Wilson only proposed legislation to strengthen the country's national security posture came after the U.S. declared war on Germany. Now, this was the Espionage Act of 1917 and the follow-on 1918 Alien and Sedition Act, which targeted American citizens who criticized the government with jail and arrest. Wilson believed that the Free Speech Amendment was not absolute. As far as Wilson's administration was concerned, the German, British, French, Russian, and Austrians could do whatever they wanted in the U.S. One of the first diplomatic incidents between Germany and the U.S. occurred on March 17, 1915. The German consulate in Seattle, Washington was raided by the local police. The German consul, Dr. William Mueller, and his secretary, B.M. Schultz, were placed under arrest for conspiracy. Mueller and his secretary had conspired with a private detective named Tarnowski and a worker from the Seattle Dry Dock and Construction Company by the name of John Murdoch to obtain information regarding the company's shipping of submarine sections to British Columbia for use by the British Navy. Now, the incident was glossed over. Instead of ordering Mueller and his secretary being declared persona non grata, Wilson agreed to Mueller being sent to the Atlanta, Georgia German consulate and have the Consul General Erich Zoffel from Atlanta take over the duties of the German consul in Seattle. Now, when the German submarine U-20 under the command of Captain Wilhelm Otto Walter Schwieger sank the Lusitania on May 7, 1915, 124 United States citizens were murdered. Wilson decided the best course of action was to send a strongly worded note to Germany. Now, this caused his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, to resign in protest. Bryan feared that Wilson's stern warning to Germany and Wilson's reluctance to ban passengers traveling on belligerent ships would involve the United States in hostilities. What you got to understand about Bryan is he was an avowed pacifist. He believed in peace at any cost. Now, if that meant American citizens had to be sacrificed while they exercised their rights of freedom of the sea, then so be it. Now, Wilson did, to his credit, threaten to sever diplomatic relations with Germany over the incident. It's a drastic measure, to be sure, but ineffective in reality when push came to shove. Germany would resume unrestricted submarine warfare at a later date. Now, this brings us to the next incident, the Albert Affair. Now, to look at Dr. Albert, a person would think he was just an ordinary businessman working in New York City, and the briefcase he carried held nothing of any great significance. In reality, Albert was the coordinator of Imperial Germany's spy network in the United States of America. Now, wherever Albert went, he carried his briefcase, and in that briefcase were telegrams from Berlin. He had letters and wires exchanged with hired agents, records of financial dealings, and reports from subordinates. The briefcase was a goldmine of information on Germany's spy network in America. Okay, so it's Saturday, July 24th, 1915. Dr. Albert, the commercial attaché and financial advisor to the Kaiser's ambassador, Count Johann von Bernstorff in Washington, D.C., decided to save on cab fare. Dr. Albert was a very frugal man. Albert hopped on a streetcar for his usual ride from his office on West 45th Street to his residence in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Nice digs if you can afford them. Now, on that day, the briefcase that Dr. Albert was carrying on the elevated train was purloined by a U.S. Secret Service agent who had been tailing Albert. Purloin's a big word for stolen. Now, there has been some recent scholarly work suggesting that it was a man by the name of Emanuel Victor Voska, a U.S. Army intelligence officer, who actually orchestrated the theft of Albert's briefcase. But that's either here nor there. The American government had in its possession a goldmine of information. It was a detailed accounting of the Kaiser's espionage network in America. In 1915, the Imperial German government allocated over $38 million to interfere with America's war production. The German government would either buy the materials outright or tie it up so it could not be sold to the Allies. The German sabotage ring in America was very efficient. The German steamer Frederick de Gross was set up as a bomb factory specialized in making pencil bombs while it was interned in New York Harbor. How did this work? Well, the Germans paid saboteurs working on the docks to slip the pencil bombs into cargo waiting to be loaded on board merchant ships. Now, after 2 days at sea, the ships would blow up without a trace. The Germans were able to destroy 36 merchant ships just using the pencil bombs. Now, one of the biggest sabotage efforts was Black Tom Island. Black Tom Island was a munitions storage depot in New York Harbor. Now, on the night of the Black Tom explosion, that was July 30th, 1916, about 2 million pounds of small arms and artillery ammunition were stored at the depot in freight cars and on barges. This included 100,000 pounds of TNT waiting to be shipped to Russia. Now, the explosion completely wiped out the island depot. It was reported in newspapers that people as far away as Maryland felt the explosion and thought it was an earthquake. An interesting side note, after the war, Lehigh Valley Railroad, who was responsible for the munitions on Black Tom Island that day, sued the Weimar Republic of Germany for damages. Now, the issue was finally settled in 1953 for $95 million, interest included, with the Federal Republic of Germany. Now, the final payment was made in 1979. That's the year I graduated from high school. The German spy network also subsidized newspapers. The Fatherland, in particular, the publisher George Sylvester Verick published pro-German propaganda. At its height, the Fatherland had a circulation of over 100,000 people. The spy network tried to publish the New York Evening Mail. Its publisher and editor-in-chief, Edward Rumley, was a pro-German sympathizer who was outraged by the pro-British stance of the other major newspapers. It was alleged in court documents that on June 1st, 1915, the Imperial German government paid to Rumley, through Walter Lyon, an intermediary, $735,000, which transferred control of the newspaper to the Kaiser and his government. Now, in July of 1918, Rumley was arrested for violating the Trading with the Enemy Act. He was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. Now, one of the most dangerous spies in America was Anton Dilger. He was an American-born physician who set up an anthrax lab in his home basement in Washington, D.C. Dilger moved to Germany when he was about 9 years old. Now, whether he moved there with his parents or was sent there to live with his grandparents is not known. Now, the interesting thing here, though, is Dilger's father, Herbert Dilger, fought in the Civil War with the rank of captain as a member of Battery I, 1st Ohio Light Artillery. Herbert Dilger was awarded the Medal of Honor. That is the highest award the U.S. government can give for bravery in the face of the enemy. His citation reads, Captain Dilger fought his gun until the enemy were upon him. Then, with one gun hauled in the road by hand, he formed the rear guard and kept the enemy at bay by the rapidity of his fire and was the last man in the retreat. His son Anton followed a different path. Anton was educated in Heidelberg, Germany. He was immersed in German culture, and he was a trained physician. Now, in 1915, Anton returned to the United States. His return was not out of loyalty to the country of his birth. Anton returned to the U.S. with cultures of anthrax with the intention of committing biological warfare on behalf of the German government. Anton set up his lab in the basement of his home in the 5500 block of 33rd Street, Northwest Chevy Chase, Washington, D.C. Now, Anton, along with his brother Carl, bought lab equipment, wire cages for the guinea pigs they would use to test the effectiveness of the poison they were to manufacture. They had an incubator oven, sterilizing machines, petri dishes, and rows of glass vials. Once the poison was ready, individual German agents would go to Anton's home once a week and pick up the poison. These German agents then delivered the cultures to ports on the East Coast, including Newport News, Norfolk, Baltimore, New York. Now there they would hire stevedores who would secretly inject the animals or contaminate their food supply with the deadly germs. The number of horses poisoned was insignificant considering the total amount shipped overseas to the Allies, but it was still an act of germ warfare and sabotage with which the authorities had to investigate. The federal government was ineffective with the German spy ring. There is no official record of President Wilson signing any executive order to counter German spying activities. Also, Wilson did not sign an executive order authorizing the Secret Service, the Bureau of Investigation, that's the forerunner to the FBI, military intelligence or naval intelligence to surveil the German embassy in Washington, D.C. Wilson could have written secret orders, but if that were the case, those orders would have been declassified by now. The only organization that had any kind of effect on negating the German spy ring was the New York City Police Department, to be more specific, the Bomb Squad. Captain Tom Tunney was able to foil a number of bomb plots and anthrax poisonings, but the ring was just too large for the New York City Police Department to handle. This was a job for the federal government to take care of. Now, as I mentioned earlier, on May 7, 1915, the Imperial German government sank the HMS Lusitania, a British passenger liner 11 miles off the coast of Ireland. I mention this fact again because a few days later, President Wilson gave his famous "Too Proud to Fight" speech. Now, to put this into context, the speech was given at a citizens' naturalization ceremony and was titled "Americanism and the Foreign Born." The section of the speech stated, "The example of America must be a special example. The example of America must be the example not merely of peace, because it will not fight, but of peace, because peace is the healing and elevating influence of the world, and strife is not. There is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. There is such a thing as a nation being so right that it does not need to convince others by force that it is right." If that is the case, then why did Wilson send troops to occupy Vera Cruz? Why did he order the punitive expedition to go after Poncho Villa? Why did he let Germans run a spy ring in New York City and Washington, D.C. for so long when he had the materials from Dr. Mueller's briefcase? It was the job of President Wilson to institute programs to minimize any harm the German spy ring would cause and to protect American citizens from the German spy ring. It was also his job to break up that spy ring. The year 1917 would see President Wilson pushed into war. First, January 1917, the Imperial German government announced its intention to resume unrestricted submarine warfare. At this point, Wilson did break off diplomatic relations with Germany. That's like one step away from war. At the same time, the German State Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Arthur Zimmermann, sent his infamous telegram to offer Mexico support with money and arms if Mexico declared war on the United States. Now, the Carranza government came back with an emphatic no on that one. Smart move. The Wilson administration released the context of the Zimmermann telegram March 1st, 1917, and then just over a month later, April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Now, I'd be very interested in what your thoughts are about President Wilson and his foreign policy. Was he an idealist or just inept? Well, I hope you found this little slice of history interesting. Now, if you did like this video, hit the like button, ring the bell for the notifications, subscribe to my channel, but most importantly, leave a comment below. This way, that infamous algorithm that YouTube uses will suggest my videos to more viewers. Thank you for watching.